I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The palace did not tremble because another rumor had surfaced. It trembled because Diana's private letters were placed before William, and within them was a memory the monarchy had tried to bury. Camilla's desperate plea came quickly, almost urgently, but William's answer was colder than anyone expected. He rejected her request, and in that single decision, the past stopped being history. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William sat alone with the file open in front of him, one hand resting on the page, as if the paper itself had become too heavy to release. The prince had read many documents in his life, but these were not ordinary papers. These were Diana's private letters, written with the pain of a woman who understood how silence could be dressed up as duty. A sealed royal archive file, meaning a protected collection of family papers kept away from public view, had been opened, and inside it sat words that carried trust, fear, loyalty, and betrayal in the same breath. Camilla understood the danger at once. She did not fear ink, she feared memory. The queen consort knew that Diana's voice, once placed back into the center of royal life, could change the balance of every decision around her. So she pleaded with William. She asked him not to let the letters influence future family choices, not to let old wounds become new rules, not to let the past decide what the present must become. But William did not soften. The future king turned another page, saw a private note attached to the letters, and the room seemed to close around him. That note suggested Diana had named specific fears about palace loyalty, fears that were not vague, not distant, and not easy to dismiss. Camilla had believed that time would protect her. She had believed Charles, duty, and the weight of the crown would persuade William to keep Diana's words contained. But the prince simply closed the file, set it down, and gave the answer that changed everything. Camilla's plea changed nothing. Diana's letters would stay inside the family record, and their meaning would not be buried for anyone's comfort. In that moment, William was not only a prince guarding a monarchy, he was a son refusing to let his mother's pain be managed again. And to understand why that plea felt so desperate, the story must move from the letters themselves to the people now trapped beneath their shadow. This was not just a dispute between William and Camilla, it was a collision between a son, a queen, and the ghost of a woman whose pain never truly left the palace walls. William carried Diana's memory like unfinished business. Camilla carried years of judgment like a hidden bruise. And Charles stood between them, watching the monarchy reopen its oldest wound. William stood by the window after reading the file, but the quiet around him did not feel peaceful. It felt dangerous. The prince had seen his mother's handwriting, felt the pressure of every sentence, and understood that these were not just private reflections from Diana. They were a record of pain left behind by a woman who had lived inside the royal machine and paid for it in silence. A royal archive file, in plain terms, is a protected family record kept away from public hands, and this one carried enough emotional weight to disturb the future king more deeply than any public scandal could. Camilla knew her own position was now fragile. She had spent years trying to move beyond the shadow of Diana, years standing beside Charles, while judgment followed her like a second crown. The queen consort sat with the king in a private room, her voice lower than usual, asking whether William could be made to reconsider. She did not speak like someone demanding victory. She spoke like someone afraid of losing the ground beneath her. Charles listened, but he did not answer quickly, and that pause wounded her more than any refusal could have. The monarch understood what the letters could reopen. Not only old headlines, but old questions about who had been protected, who had been ignored, and who had carried the emotional cost of palace survival. One aide standing near the doorway noticed the king's silence and looked away, because everyone in that room understood what it meant when Charles did not immediately defend her. William's pain was personal, but Camilla's fear was personal too. He was fighting for the mother he lost, while she was fighting for the place she had spent decades trying to secure. Charles stood between both truths and found no easy mercy in either. The palace wanted control, But control had already slipped. The letters had not simply returned Diana to the conversation. They had placed William, Camilla, and the king inside the same wound, with no way to leave unchanged. Because long before William rejected Camilla's plea, one private incident had already turned old grief into a ticking royal crisis. Every royal storm has a first crack, and this one began at a remembrance ceremony nobody expected to become dangerous. A single conversation after the service changed the temperature inside the family. Camilla asked for Diana's name to be handled carefully in future commemorations, but William heard something else. He heard caution where he wanted respect. He heard control where he wanted truth. William removed his gloves slowly after the service, one finger at a time, as if he needed those few seconds to stop himself from saying too much. The prince had stood through the remembrance ceremony with a face carved into restraint, but inside, something had shifted. A remembrance ceremony is a formal event held to honor someone's life and legacy, and this one mattered because Diana's memory was not just family history. It was still a living wound for her sons, still a public symbol for people who believed she had been misunderstood, and still a quiet danger for those inside the palace who wanted the past handled neatly. Camilla stepped toward him with a voice made soft by caution, urging that future tributes avoid reopening wounds. She meant control. Or at least, that is how William heard it. The queen consort wanted Diana's name handled carefully, but the future king believed care was becoming another word for silence. He looked at her, said nothing, and the silence struck harder than any reply. Camilla stood beside an aide as William walked away without reassurance, and humiliation settled over her in a way no public insult ever could. She had not asked for Diana to be erased, but she had asked for Diana to be managed, and that difference became impossible to defend. The aide saw her face change, saw the queen consort's confidence fall for one brief moment, and understood that something had been broken. That same week, an archivist reviewing restricted family papers flagged Diana's private letters inside a sealed file. Restricted family papers are documents kept from normal access because they contain personal or sensitive royal material, and these mattered because their timing turned memory into evidence. Camilla learned through a quiet internal note that the file had been moved for senior review, and fear sharpened instantly. She knew William would connect the ceremony conversation to the emotional force of those letters. She knew the prince would see the same pattern, a mother whose pain had once been softened by palace language, and a present attempt to soften her again. By the time the file reached his desk, the past was no longer waiting in an archive. It was walking straight toward a confrontation. And once grief, memory, and royal power entered the same room, the meeting that followed became impossible to contain. The confrontation did not happen before cameras, courtiers, or ceremonial staff. It happened behind a closed door, where titles meant less than history. Camilla entered believing persuasion was still possible. William entered already carrying Diana's words in his mind. Between them sat a file, a lifetime of pain, and one question neither could soften: who had the right to decide what Diana's memory meant? Camilla spoke first, but her voice did not carry the confidence she wanted it to carry. She told William that the present should not be punished for the pain of the past, that the family had already survived too much, and that Diana's letters should not become a blade used against the living. The prince listened without interrupting, and that restraint made the room feel even tighter. Charles had allowed the meeting after her request reached William through him, and that mattered because the king was not just a husband caught between loyalties. He was the monarch, the person expected to protect the family's unity while guarding the crown's future. A ceremonial role, in simple words, means the official duties and public appearances given to a royal figure during important events, and Camilla knew Diana's letters could now threaten her place in those future moments. She wanted the file kept away from decisions about her role. She wanted mercy wrapped in procedure. William wanted truth wrapped in dignity. He answered carefully, but there was steel beneath every word. The past was never buried, he told her. It was only managed. Camilla's face changed when she heard that, because the queen consort understood he was not speaking only about documents. He was speaking about years of silence, years of soft language, Years when Diana's pain had been turned into something easier for the palace to survive. Then came the gesture that changed everything. Camilla reached toward the file, not aggressively, not dramatically, but with the desperate instinct of someone trying to touch the thing destroying her. William moved it back slightly, just an inch, just enough. The prince did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her in cruel words, but that small movement told her the letters no longer belonged to the version of history she hoped to control. He declared that Diana's words would remain part of the internal record, meaning the private family account used to guide sensitive decisions inside the monarchy. They could not be dismissed for anyone's comfort, not even hers. Camilla sat back, wounded and stunned, while William held the line with painful calm. This was no longer just a son refusing a plea. It was the future king, showing that Diana's memory now had power inside the palace again. Because William's refusal was not merely a son's reaction. It revealed who now held the strength to shape the palace's future. The palace understood the danger at once. William had not shouted. He had not threatened. He had simply refused, and that made the decision more powerful. In royal life, the quietest words often carry the heaviest consequences. Camilla had asked for protection, but William's answer exposed a deeper shift. The monarchy was no longer bending around old arrangements. Charles read the written response slowly, and with every line, the king seemed to understand that his son had crossed into a new kind of authority. The prince was not acting like a wounded child. He was acting like the future king, weighing memory, public trust, and the survival of the crown with a calm that made the room feel colder. The crown, in simple terms, means the monarchy as an institution, not just one person wearing a title. And this mattered because William's judgment now carried weight beyond family emotion. Camilla's plea had become politically dangerous because it looked like a request to contain Diana's pain instead of facing it. The queen consort wanted protection, but the palace saw risk. If William appeared to bury those letters for her comfort, the public would one day see it as another royal cover-up, another silence forced onto Diana's name. Charles placed the response on the desk without speaking, his face heavy with recognition. Camilla waited for him to challenge William. She waited for the king to defend her, to say that the prince had gone too far, to promise that the old balance would be restored. But Charles said nothing. His silence did not sound empty. It sounded like surrender. And in that quiet, she felt abandoned by the one person who had once promised that the future would not keep punishing her for the past. A senior courtier then began preparing a revised internal guidance note, which means a private instruction used inside the palace to guide who is consulted on sensitive decisions. That note quietly limited Camilla's involvement in Diana-related commemorative planning. It did not insult her. It did not remove her publicly. That made it more devastating. It reduced her with language so calm that no one could easily fight it. William did not frame the move as revenge. The prince framed it as protection. Protection of Diana's dignity. Protection of the monarchy's credibility. Protection of the public trust that could not survive another managed truth. Camilla understood the message before anyone said it plainly. The palace was not choosing drama. It was choosing distance. And for the first time, the queen consort saw that William's refusal had become more than a private answer. It had become the beginning of a new order, one where Diana's memory could no longer be negotiated away. And when those consequences finally reached Camilla, the first crack in her composure came behind a door no one was supposed to open. The fallout did not arrive as a public announcement. It arrived as a quiet briefing, a revised paper, and a sentence Camilla read twice because she could not believe its meaning. Her role around Diana's legacy had been narrowed. Her access to certain commemorative decisions had been removed. The palace had not shouted its judgment, but the message was unmistakable. William's refusal had become policy. Camilla sat alone after the briefing, the document open on her lap, her fingers tightening against the page, until the paper bent beneath her touch. The queen consort had survived public anger before, but this felt different. This was not a headline she could outlast. This was an internal decision, a palace line drawn quietly around the part of history she was no longer allowed to touch. Internal planning, in simple terms, means the private decisions made before royal events, tributes, or family moments are shown to the world. And this mattered because Diana's memory was now being guarded from behind closed doors. Camilla had been informed that she would no longer be consulted on matters connected to Diana's letters, legacy events, or sensitive family tributes. The decision was presented as a stabilizing measure, a way to stop emotional conflict from damaging the crown. But she heard the deeper message. The palace was not protecting her from pain. It was protecting itself from her involvement. Charles entered slowly, and the king knew before speaking that comfort would not be enough. He saw the document on her lap. He saw the anger beneath her stillness. Camilla asked one question, soft but sharp. Did William personally approve every line? The monarch paused, and that pause answered before his words did. Yes, the prince had approved it. Yes, the future king had turned his refusal into structure. Yes, Diana's letters had become powerful enough to change who stood near her memory. Charles tried to explain that the move was meant to prevent another fracture, but Camilla looked down again, because the explanation only made the wound cleaner, not smaller. Then came the detail that made the room colder. A locked archive note revealed that Diana's letters were now being treated as protected family testimony, meaning personal evidence preserved as part of the royal record, rather than disposable private correspondence. That mattered, because testimony carries weight. It cannot be casually ignored. It cannot be softened for comfort. Camilla understood that Diana's voice had been given a place she could not reach. The queen consort was not removed from the family, not publicly shamed, not openly attacked. But in the one area where her history hurt most, she had been pushed outside the door. Because when William and Charles finally speak without advisors between them, the monarchy's public face gives way to a father and son standing inside the same wound. For the first time since the letters surfaced, William and Charles met without aids, notes, or prepared language. No palace machinery softened the conversation. No courtier translated pain into protocol. Charles looked older in that room, and William looked less like a prince than a son still trying to understand what silence had cost his mother. This was the moment the crown became personal. Charles lowered himself into a chair before he asked the question that had been sitting between them for days. Was this about justice, anger, or protecting Diana's memory? The king did not ask as a ruler demanding obedience. He asked as a father who already feared the answer. William stayed still for a moment, and the silence carried more truth than any palace statement ever could. The prince made it clear that his decision was not designed to destroy Camilla. He was not trying to tear open the family for revenge. He was trying to stop the palace from controlling Diana's voice again. The crown, in plain words, means the monarchy as a living institution, built from duty, public trust, and family sacrifice. And this mattered because William believed that trust could not survive another hidden compromise. Charles understood that his son was no longer arguing from childhood grief alone. The future king was speaking from duty, but duty had become inseparable from pain. The monarch admitted quietly, through a private recorded conversation kept within the family record, that some wounds had been managed instead of healed. That confession changed the air. William's voice broke only once, and only when he said Diana deserved truth without negotiation. Not comfort, not careful wording. Truth. Charles looked down, because the king knew those words reached further back than one file, one plea, or one decision. Then he revealed something William had not expected. Years earlier, he had read one of Diana's letters, but he had not understood how much it would one day mean to the son sitting before him. The prince absorbed that admission like another wound opening, but he did not turn away. He asked Charles not to reverse the decision, not to weaken it for peace, not to ask him to silence his mother one more time in the name of family unity. The monarch finally gave the answer Camilla had feared, and William needed. He would let it stand. In that room, father and son did not heal everything, but they stopped pretending the wound was not there. And with that quiet agreement, Diana's memory returned not as scandal, but as authority. And once the public sensed that Diana's voice had returned to the center of royal life, the reaction outside the palace became impossible to ignore. By morning, the story had escaped the walls that once held it. London woke to a front page that felt less like news and more like judgment. Diana's name stood beside William's refusal, and Camilla's plea became the sentence everyone repeated. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this was different. This time, the public was not watching a controversy, it was watching a memory return. Camilla saw the newspaper at breakfast and stopped before she even touched her cup. The headline sat there like a verdict. William chooses Diana's voice. Beside it was Diana's old photograph, printed with the kind of force that made the past feel present again. The queen consort folded the paper slowly, but not before the words had already done their damage. Palace communications moved quickly, trying to steady the narrative by describing William's decision as an act of dignity, privacy, and legacy. Palace communications, in simple words, means the official team that shapes how royal decisions are explained to the public. And this mattered because one wrong sentence could make the crown look cruel, secretive, or afraid. But the public did not hear procedure. The public heard a son refusing to bury his mother's pain. William watched the morning broadcast in silence, as one presenter called him, the son who finally refused to look away. The prince did not smile. He did not celebrate. He understood that public support could still carry private cost. Kensington Palace became the center of emotion within hours. Kensington Palace is the royal residence most closely tied to William's adult life. And the crowd gathering outside it mattered because people were not arriving with anger alone. They came with white flowers, handwritten notes, and quiet thanks for Diana's memory being protected. One note read, "She deserved to be heard." Another said, "Thank you for choosing truth." Camilla remained behind closed doors, knowing every flower left outside those gates made her plea look smaller, and William's refusal look larger. Charles heard the public reaction through a briefing and said little, because the king understood that the monarchy had entered dangerous ground. The crown was being praised, but only because it had stopped hiding from the woman it once failed to protect. That kind of praise cuts both ways. It lifts William while reminding Charles of old wounds. It honors Diana while isolating Camilla. By evening, the palace had regained control of the wording, but not the feeling. The public had chosen its symbol, and that symbol was no longer the queen consort's survival. It was Diana's voice returning through William's decision. Because after the noise, the headlines, and the palace briefings faded, one emotional verdict remained for William, Camilla, Charles, and the crown. In the end, William's rejection of Camilla's desperate plea was not an act of cruelty, it was an act of memory. Diana's letters did not return to punish the monarchy. They returned to force it to tell the truth about what silence had cost. Camilla lost influence over one sacred part of royal history. William gained something heavier than victory, the burden of finally letting his mother be heard. William stood before the protected archive with the letters in his hands, and for a moment, the prince did not look like a man celebrating a victory. He looked like a son returning something sacred to the only place where it could no longer be twisted. The protected archive, in simple words, is a secure royal record where sensitive family papers are kept safe from misuse, and this mattered because Diana's words were no longer being treated as disposable memories. They had become part of the family record, guarded from manipulation, protected from comfort, and held as proof that truth had survived. Camilla sat alone after the final decision, not publicly defeated, not stripped before the cameras, but privately aware that one door in royal life had closed forever. The queen consort still had her place beside Charles. She still had her title, her duties, and her place within the monarchy. But around Diana's legacy, her influence had been permanently reduced, and that quiet loss cut deeper because it could not be challenged without exposing the very fear that had caused it. Charles accepted the decision with sadness, because the king understood that peace could not be built by asking William to silence Diana again. He had spent years trying to hold the family together through restraint, but restraint had reached its limit. The monarch knew now that some silence does not protect a crown. It slowly weakens it. The final internal note confirmed what everyone inside the palace already understood. Diana's letters would remain protected. Her words would remain part of the family record, and future decisions connected to her memory would be handled without Camilla's private influence. An internal note is a private palace instruction used to guide decisions behind closed doors. And this one mattered because it turned emotion into rule. William placed the letters back, not as weapons against the queen consort, but as evidence that his mother's truth could no longer be managed for anyone's comfort. The prince had chosen memory over convenience. He had chosen dignity over silence. He had chosen the painful truth over the easier lie of royal peace. Camilla lost control over one sacred part of history. Charles lost the illusion that every wound could be softened by duty. And William accepted the burden of carrying Diana's voice into the future of the crown. This was the emotional verdict. The monarchy changed because a son refused to let his mother disappear behind palace language again. And so the story ends not with Camilla's plea, but with William's answer. Diana's voice would not be hidden again, and the crown would have to live with the truth it once tried to manage. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.